So what I'm actually trying to do is to think about how is it possible to start making decisions about the painting much earlier. So it's not just about making marks and building an image or depicting something. It's much more about seeing how you can start pushing back at that moment whereby the work starts. So for me, in a way, the work kind of starts when I go and buy the timber, when I'm looking for proportions, and when I'm thinking about the actual material of the painting. It's much more about material kinds of aspects and how you make those things really the expressive kind of aspects of the work when it's finished. Proportions and dimensions of paintings are based upon things I might have seen that have a kind of architectural source.
Right.
So forms I've actually seen or noticed in the world around me that I'm interested in, or things that I actually respond to in terms of architecture. I try and get a sense of that proportion. Then I would come in here and then begin to draw out on the wall. I clean the wall and I just draw out the beginnings of an idea of proportion, and then gradually I adjust that by just painting over the line until finally on the wall I've got just a simple line drawing of the proportion of the work I want to make. And then from that point then I begin obviously to think about the kind of depth, if I'm going to alter that form, and then just begin this decision making that really is to do with trying to really substantiate this relationship that we would have with a form which has a physical dimension.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, yeah.
So how do you actually come up with a form that we respond to rather than a form that has no particular meaning? Because I think some forms have much kind of seem to have a stronger, or they just seem to we can respond to them more directly, or they seem to have a relationship with ourselves bodily.
In a very physical way.
It's about the physical dimension, which normally these things are normally things that a sculptor would talk about. But the kind of painting I'm trying to make is because I'm really taking out everything to do with the image. I'm interested in that somehow what's not there is actually replaced by something else, which is about how you actually, how do I explain it? This is the complicated bit. It's about actually animating, someone who's looking at your work is about animating all their senses. So it's not primarily about just what we see or what the eye does. It's about how all the senses relate and how an experience is actually about all the senses being animated at the same time. Yeah. So the physical aspect of the painting is to try to get a relationship with the person looking at the work, which is about all our senses and how all those senses respond. I mean, we were talking earlier on about how that, lots of people who are interested in painting, especially artists, they will go and see a work and you will look actually for the authentic aspect of the work, and you look to the side, you look to the edge, and I would always used to go to the Tate and look at the Rothkos, the fantastic room of Rothko, and I felt really stupid standing in front of these things, which the image of it is so well known. I felt the dumbest way to actually approach that work is to stand in front of it and look at it as if you're looking at a landscape painting. These things don't operate in that way. And I would always find myself going to the edge and somehow trying to find a mark that for me was kind of authentic in terms of the fact that it hadn't kind of entered a kind of common consciousness in terms of the image, and also to try and find a way of actually responding to the work physically and understanding the thing physically.
And you can get that more from the side.
And for some reason, in certain kinds of work, by going and standing next to something, you're able to really feel more than what you just have by using your eye. There seems to be more there. A tiny bit of authenticity.
Yeah.
The fact it's actually real.
Yeah, because
it's not just an image.
It could be in a book, or I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly. And it's this interesting thing that for some reason the actual image, and when something becomes so well known as an image, it becomes unreal. And we respond to a certain kind of thing in terms of the image. But actually painting is a very physical activity. And if you make painting, if you're going through all these decisions which are about a physical activity, to me it seems that what is important is that those aspects of the work are actually things that finally are the things that the person who's looking at the work can respond to.
Yes.
And so a lot of the stress that I make, the kind of direction that I'm trying to take is how do you actually elevate those things so they become expressive things.
And they come right to the front of the...
Yeah, or you have to be aware that actually you're not looking at a picture, you're not looking at a representation of something. You're actually responding to a real physical thing. You're standing in front of something real.
Presumably you're going to lose quite a bit of the pigment as well. A lot's going to wash off.
You lose a lot, but there's a lot in there. I mean, if you imagine that it's just sized into white canvas, into just the cotton duck. So that its darkness just shows how much pigment there is in there. It's really in it. Already there's a kind of there's an actual surface on the canvas. It stopped being, what's traditionally just a support for an image. It started being actual material in its own right.
Is it sort of dyeing the canvas then in a way? Would you say?
Well, it's kind of staining it, or it's basically how a frustration I seem to have with some of the things I made in the past was I felt, even though they were very removed from images and from representation, there's something about the process of oil painting that the actual mark seems to sit on the actual material surface of the canvas, seems to sit on it. And you don't get this sense, I don't think, you don't get a very clear sense of the actual entire physical nature of the canvas and the actual painting being one. You get the sense of them being slightly separated. Just, even though it's a tiny separation, to me it seems to be a kind of blocking of the possibility that the actual material that you make a painting with and the way you actually apply the paint weren't able to be one. They weren't able to be convincingly one real thing. So this new kind of way of working is to somehow try and allow all the aspects of making a paint to become, in the end, one physical reality that you can respond to. And to try and just push together that little gap between the actual painting, the actual physical painting in traditional sense, and the actual physical canvas and stretcher and the dimensions and the proportions. You begin to see the kind of mark making, what's happening.
It looks like a really nice thing to do.
I kind of enjoy it because it's not painting being this sort of activity where you're sitting and you're kind of like making these little marks. It's much more about dealing with the whole thing. Really grabbing that entire thing, its physicality, and really, kind of relating to it straight away on that level. So I need to be here to really understand what it is I'm doing, because I can forget over a weekend.
Yeah, no.
And it sounds ridiculous, but I can literally forget what I've been doing for 10 years over a weekend if I'm out of contact with it. So a lot of the time it's about scrabbling to get something really quite slippery, to get it back and to get all these things in place so you can really be effective in terms of what it is you're trying to get at.
And it can so easily slip out of your reach.
Absolutely, and everything about the world actually conspires to make that happen. So you have to be able to be really, trying to be as undistracted as possible in order to do one thing well. And the idea of this was because with these paler paintings, they're very, very lean and very, very stripped back and really quite austere. So what I'm thinking with this much darker one is to try and make something that somehow is much more luxurious or really kind of much more about the material. So to have something going on around here, right away along all the edges, which is much more about a kind of understanding of the real luxurious side of the material and actually about moving slightly away from this very lean and austere way that had been working.
Yes, yeah.
And seeing what will happen. I mean, I think it's happening to a degree with that red one in the corner.
Yeah.
It just seems much more luxurious kind of use of the material, or it's not so stripped down really. If I don't work, if I have a period of time I don't work, I just get bored. I get bored of things. And I actually need to somehow find a way of channeling my way of looking, my interest in looking, into work. So if I can't actually do that, if there isn't this sort of mechanism whereby the things I'm actually experiencing in my life have a connection with the things I'm making, I get very frustrated and bored. History as an idea has only really got any meaning if it actually has a visual or physical dimension to it in terms of the painting. So the history is actually what's left in terms of traces, and that's important because that's what gives me the clue for the next step. So it's not this kind of idea of history which is about look at it and work and you understand the history of its making in that literal sense. It's much more about how we can maybe understand, we get a sense of a kind of a period of time or a sense of time as something to be understood through responding to the actual surface. That's slightly different, do you think that? It's like trying to make the idea of time, or if you want history, something that you actually physically respond to. You understand these things in yourself. It's not just about the way the object looks, it's about your response to it. Because I think what I'm really interested in doing is somehow trying to make things where the real ambition of the work is that the person who is looking at it becomes very aware of how they're looking, how they perceive. So somehow it's not about me saying, here, I'm an artist, look at my work. It's about saying, here you are, a person responding, and that somehow the stress is on the response in the person. And just going back to my original kind of thing I said before about when I'm making something, I only know it's finished if it becomes invisible because I stop seeing faults. So therefore it's finished because I cannot see it anymore. That there's a kind of equation between the work becoming invisible at a certain stage, and this also is possible if the work is successful. This might sound very kind of oblique, but it's somehow, if a kind of a process of perception in the viewer takes place, they finally become aware of themselves in relation to something, and at a certain point they become aware of themselves and the actual work is almost made invisible. Over the last few years I've been working with archaeologists, so one of the kind of things that's also helped to determine the direction of the work is ideas that have come from spending time on an excavation. And one of the things that's really extraordinary about excavations is it's a place where a sense of time is incredibly tangible. And for me it's tangible because you're actually responding really directly to the surface of the landscape. So it's about a material response. It's about a physical response to a material environment. And I try to take these kinds of ideas and think, how can I get these things into painting? And because I've been so concerned with actually making paintings that are really slow and kind of reveal themselves over a period of time, that some of the kind of principles that came from archaeology or some of the experiences that I had when I was at these places have really kind of helped me to focus on very general ideas which are about how we understand time or passage of time through response.